If you're a high-achieving woman who's exhausted by stress, stuck in constant conflict, and tired of being overlooked in the exact rooms where you know you were born to lead, then this podcast is for you. So here's your host, Pallavi Jain.
Welcome back to The Boss Brain. I'm your host, Pallavi. Last week, as we celebrated 50 episodes together, I shared the deeper philosophy that has emerged from hundreds of conversations, coaching sessions, workshops, and of course, this podcast. We talked about 3 levels that shape how we show up under pressure: understanding ourselves, leading ourselves, and ultimately influencing others. But knowing the philosophy is only one part of the story. The next question becomes, how do we actually build those capabilities? That's what today's episode is all about. So when I first started this podcast, I thought I was going to have conversations about leadership. Then I thought I was talking about communication, then decision making, then difficult conversations, and so on. And as the episodes continued, something interesting happened. Whether I was interviewing a chief people officer, talking with executives, attorneys, healthcare leaders, coaches, sharing one of my own stories, or teaching from my workshops, I realized we kept coming back to the same question. Why do some people seem to become their best under pressure while others lose access to the very capabilities they need most? Because pressure changes us, not because we are weak, but because we are human. Pressure narrows our attention, it speeds up our thinking, it amplifies emotion, and it makes assumptions feel like facts. It makes reactions feel inevitable. But after coaching leaders for years and reflecting on almost 50 conversations on this podcast and my own journey, I've come to believe something different. The people who thrive under pressure aren't necessarily smarter. They aren't always the most experienced. They haven't figured out how to eliminate pressure. They have simply developed a different way of responding to it. Today, I want to share 7 practices I've consistently seen in people who continue to lead, communicate, decide, and perform well when the pressure is high. Now, these aren't quick tips. They are practices that strengthen the person behind the performance. And let's begin with what I believe is the foundation of everything else. So, practice number 1, they create space before they respond. Several years ago, I was in a conversation that didn't go the way I expected. Someone challenged something I'd worked incredibly hard on. Before they had even finished speaking, I could feel myself, preparing my defense. I wasn't listening anymore. I was rehearsing my response. Have you ever noticed yourself doing that? Your body gets tense, your heart rate increases, your mind starts racing. Nothing dramatic has happened, yet inside, your brain has already shifted into protection mode. This is exactly what our brain is designed to do. Right? The amygdala is constantly scanning our environment, asking one question: am I safe? The challenge is that it doesn't just react to physical danger. It reacts to psychological threats too. Criticism, uncertainty, rejection, feeling misunderstood. And when that happens, our executive function, the part of our brain responsible for judgment, creativity, perspective, and intentional decision making, has a harder time staying online. And this is why I developed the first step of the ATM framework: arrive. Arriving isn't about slowing life down. It's about noticing that your internal state has changed before it starts making decisions for you. I've learned that pause isn't passive, it's productive. It's where you regain access to your boss brain. Now, it's where you stop reacting from, instinct and start responding with intention. So pressure doesn't eliminate your choices. It simply shortens the time you have to recognize them. And that small space between stimulus and response, that's where leadership begins. Now we come to practice number 2. They protect the quality of their thinking. People who are high achievers, who can actually thrive under pressure, this is the practice number 2 that they do. They protect the quality of their thinking. One of my favorite examples is a simple one, and I think I've shared that with you all before. You send your manager an email, and hours have gone by, no response. That's the fact. Now watch what happens next, right? You start thinking, oh, they must be upset. I probably shouldn't have said that. Maybe they are questioning my work. None of those are facts. They are interpretations. One of the biggest breakthrough I've seen in working with leaders is helping them recognize that we don't react to events. We react to the meaning we assign to those events. Our brain hates uncertainty, so it fills in the blanks. And the dangerous part is that once we have created an interpretation, we begin looking for evidence to support it. I've done this. You've probably done this too. We all do. The practice isn't to stop interpreting. The practice is to notice when we have confused interpretation with reality. When you start protecting the quality of your thinking, you make better decisions because you're responding to what's actually happening, not just what's your brain predicting, and whether that might be happening or not. So that's practice number 2. Now let's come to practice number 3. They choose their response. The high achievers who can thrive under pressure, they choose their response. One phrase I've heard, throughout my career is, she made me angry. He ruined my day. That meeting completely threw me off. I understand why we say those things, but over time, I realized something. Every time I believed someone else was controlling my response, I was unknowingly giving away my influence. Here's the distinction. You don't always choose your first emotion, but you almost always have influence over what happens next. That is where responsibility lives. Not blame, choice. I often ask leaders a simple question before they walk into a difficult conversation. Who do you want to be when you walk out? Not how do you win? Not how do you prove you're right? Who do you want to be? Because pressure reveals our habits, but intentionality reveals our character. And after that, let's come to practice number 4. Regulate before you communicate. Now, in my coaching career, I worked with a leader who kept saying, I don't understand why my team gets defensive every time I give feedback. His feedback wasn't actually the problem. His state was. He walked into every conversation frustrated, impatient, convinced that people weren't performing or they wouldn't understand them or that, they're not giving their best. And before he spoke a single word, his team could already feel it. And that changed how I think about communication because communication doesn't begin when we speak. It begins with the version of ourselves that walks into the room. People experience our nervous system before they process our message. And that's why executive presence isn't about charisma. It's about regulation. Before every important conversation, I try to ask myself, what state am I bringing into this conversation? Sometimes changing that answers the problem before a single word is spoken. So after the 4 practices we have gone through, let's come to the 5th practice. Staying curious longer. One of the gifts of experience is that, you recognize patterns. And one of its dangers is that you start believing you've seen it all. Some of the best leaders I've worked with have one thing in common. They don't rush to certainty. They slow down just long enough to remain curious. I remember facilitating a leadership team that was frustrated with this one employee, right? Everyone had already decided that he was resistant to change. Now, before the conversation moved on, one leader asked, I wonder if we are missing something. That one sentence changed everything because it turned out that the employee wasn't resistant. He simply hadn't been included early enough to understand the reasoning behind the change. Curiosity didn't just improve that conversation, it prevented a poor leadership decision. And the older I get, the less interested I am in being the smartest person in the room. I'm far more interested in continuing to learn. Curiosity keeps us all open, and openness creates possibilities that certainty often closes. I think this has been my biggest lesson in the last few years, where I've really tried to become more open and more curious than having a set notion of this is how things are, this is what I believe is going on, but just coming into the conversation with more openness and curiosity. Let's come to practice number 6. Move before you feel ready. If there's one thing I've learned from, hosting this podcast, it's almost every guest I've spoken with has experienced, fear or self-doubt, imposter syndrome, failure, setbacks. The difference wasn't that they didn't experience those things. The difference was that they didn't wait for confidence and certainty before taking action. Think about your own life. How many opportunities have you delayed because you wanted to feel completely ready? I've done it too. But growth and this journey has taught me something, that confidence is really the starting point. It's often the result of sometimes just taking that first leap of action with that faith in your mind that this is something that I want to do and I have the information right now and this is what I can do right now about it. And then you build confidence by taking those small actions consistently, not by waiting for certainty. Pressure has a way of magnifying perfectionism. It convinces us that, we need one more course, we need one more conversation, one more plan, we need to be certain. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply take the next intentional step. Because high performers don't wait until uncertainty disappears. They learn to make thoughtful decisions while it is still present. And now let's come to the seventh and the last practice that I want to share today. Build your inner capacity before you need it. Throughout this podcast, you've heard me talk about the ATM framework as a way of responding in the moment. But here's something I've come to appreciate over the years. Imagine making withdrawals from your bank account every single day without ever making deposits. Eventually, you run out. The same thing happens internally. Every difficult conversation is a withdrawal. Every decision, every conflict, every hustle, every disappointment, every change, every leadership challenge. The question is, what deposits are you making along the way? Are you investing in reflection, in learning, in getting better, in good sleep, relationships, awareness, perspective? These aren't luxuries. They're how we build the capacity we'll eventually need. And one of the biggest myths, about resilience is that it's built during the storm. It isn't. The storm simply reveals what we have already built. And that's why I often say that, you don't rise to the occasion. You draw from the capacity you have intentionally developed over time. As I reflect on these conversations, all the coaching sessions, workshops that I've done, and over the past year with all the guests and their wisdom that they have shared here, I don't think that people who thrive under pressure have discovered some secret that the rest of us haven't. They've just simply become more intentional. Intentional about how they think, intentional about the stories they believe, intentional about how they respond, about the person they are becoming, the relationships that matter to us. Pressure isn't going away. The reality is, if anything, the pace of work and life will only continue to increase. So perhaps the better question isn't, how do I avoid pressure? It is, who am I becoming because of it? Because thriving under pressure isn't about performing perfectly. It's about building the inner capacity to keep showing up with clarity, courage, and intention when it matters the most. So here's my invitation to you this week. Don't try to practice all 7, just choose one. One practice that resonated with you, one conversation where you will pause before reacting, one assumption you will question, one moment where you will choose curiosity over certainty, one opportunity where you will take the next step before you feel completely ready. Because lasting transformation rarely happens through one big decision. It happens through small intentional choices repeated over time. And if one of these practices challenged you today, I'd love to hear from you. Okay, send me a message on LinkedIn, leave a review, or share this episode with someone who's navigating pressure right now. Those conversations literally shape this podcast just as much as the ones I have, behind this microphone. So until next time, remember this: pressure is inevitable. Growth is intentional. And your greatest advantage has never been what's happening around you. It's the person you're becoming within it. Take care, everyone.
So that's it for today's episode of our Boss Brain podcast. Head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, or wherever you listen and subscribe to the show. One lucky listener every single week that posts a review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes will win a chance in a grand prize drawing to win a $25,000 private VIP day with Pallavi herself. Be sure to head on over to her bossbrainpodcast.com and pick up a free copy of Palovi's Gift and join us next time.
I don't stop.